All right, everybody. Thanks, and welcome to another episode of What's New at TapClicks for March 2021. Everyone should be able to see the slides here. So I'm going to start by just first introducing myself. So my name is Brian Childs. I lead the product education team here at TapClicks. And before we get started, it's always good to talk through some of just the housekeeping things for our What's New webinar. So this is a monthly webinar. So if you've attended one of these in the past, thanks. If you haven't, welcome. So you have the opportunity to discuss and ask questions. So there is a chat box that you should be able to see for all of those who are familiar with Zoom. You can use that chat box, ask questions, and I'll also make some time at the end for Q&A. And I am recording the session. So if you register in the future, you always get a link to the recording afterward. All right, and I always recommend following along. So if you go to support.tapclicks.com, you'll see a lot of the stuff that that we're talking about here. Now, this month in particular, so this is the March 2021 release notes. You can see here that if you go, you can see a little breadcrumb right here to get to the release notes. It's in a release notes section, and you'll find it here, March 2021, and you can go and read to your heart's content all the different release notes. Now, in this month, there actually is quite a bit of stuff. So we're going to focus in on just really one of the items, but there's a lot of stuff that's actually within this particular article. If you're using the orders and workflow tool, for example, there's quite a few updates to orders and workflow, some interesting things going on there. And then there's just a bunch of work that's gone on with the connector. So as you're probably familiar reading the release notes, I'm sure you all do, on a monthly basis, there's a tremendous amount of work that gets done by the connector team. So there's always new connections, new instant on connections, new smart connector templates, updates to data sources and things like that. So you'll see a lot of that within here as well. However, this month, there's some really interesting things in particular as it relates to the smart connector. So we are going to talk about those updates related to the smart connector primarily, and you can see the number one item here at the very top of these of the release notes, which is this TapAccess in quotes data sharing now available in all instances. So that means if you are currently in an instance where you have smart connector enabled, whether or not that's through the instance terms that you have, or if you're in a tier where smart connectors are available, you're now going to have access to this feature called TapAccess, which is used for data sharing. Now, there's another one as well, which you can see sort of at the bottom of the screen here, which is the multi-level capability as well. Now, if we have time, I'll go and touch on that one as well, because that's another very, very interesting and very, very powerful tool that solves some cool things. So let's go ahead and start. First off, if you have any questions, you can use the chat window there. For those of you who are currently in the webinar, maybe tell me in the chat whether or not you have access to a Smart Connector. So are you someone who uses Smart Connector? And then as we go along, let me know whether or not this use case applies to you. So so first, if you just go into the chat window there, type into the chat like either yes, I do have Smart Connector, or no, I don't have Smart Connector, or I don't even know what Smart Connector is. What word are you saying? Go ahead and toss that into the chat, and then that'll be something that's helpful for me to understand sort of level set where everybody's at. Okay, so today's topic, well, we already covered this, right? Data sharing, TapAccess. Let's go in and we'll talk about these about this aspect. All right. So I'm going to start with if you're familiar, if you've come to these before, or you've been to these What's New webinars, I'm going to start with a lingo bingo. So what is lingo bingo? That means we're just going to talk about a quick term before we dive into stuff so that we level set everybody's understanding and that knowledge. Well, we're going to be talking a lot about smart connectors. Well, I'm going to guess that many of you, since you are the type of people that join a What's New webinar, that you probably are using smart connectors. It looks like Barry, you already said yes to that. Kara, okay, cool. Looking to see a smart connector, but don't use a smart connector currently. All right. Well, first off, let's just make sure that we understand what smart connector means. It sounds like many of you do, but if you're listening to the recording here, it's possible that you're not familiar with that term if it's not in your instance. All right. We have instant on connectors in TapClicks, and we have smart connectors in TapClicks. Instant ons are all of those easy, simple authentications where you're using an OAuth or credentialing into an existing application. So I have Google Analytics, Facebook Ads, Google Ads, Amazon ads, any of the 250 plus connectors that we have where you're just purely going in and doing a quick authentication. Usually that can be an OAuth where it just says, do you want to use this particular Gmail account or whatever? Or you can put in credentials. That is an instant on connector. There are a ton of those. Those are those established connections. Smart connectors. Smart connector is where you want to connect literally any other data to the system. Now, the smart connector is super, super powerful. One of the most common things that people do is they do a like CSV upload. I got this CSV from this system or this event or whatever, and I just want to upload it into TapClicks. So they'll just go to the smart connector, and you'll be able to manually upload a CSV, and it can go into your system and you can use it for your insights. But there are a bunch of different what we call delivery types, so different ways of getting data into the system, whether or not it's through a database or you can even email it to yourself. So the smart connector is a way of getting any other data that is not an instant on connector into the system. You're probably all aware of that, but if you're not, just wanted to go and do a little lingo bingo on that. Okay, so let's go ahead and then go into the data sharing and TapAccess conversation. All right, so this is a really interesting feature. I'm going to start with a use case because I know that y'all love use cases. So I'll use this use case. Now in the release notes, you'll see a link to an article that describes this in more depth. So if you want to dig into this a little bit more, or for whatever reason you're not tracking on this thing, we can always you can always go to that article and read more about it. So a common case for using this data sharing feature is maybe I'm a brand or I'm a company and I have another company that I'm working with, or I've outsourced work to an agency and they are using TapClicks and I'm using TapClicks. And what I want to do is I don't want to have to log into two different instances. It's like I got my data and I got my contractor's data in their own TapClicks instance. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to have to keep switching back and forth. What I'd like to do is I'd like to get the data from that agency or contractor that I have, and I want to pull it into my instance of TapClicks. You can do that with TapAccess. So what TapAccess allows you to do is it allows you to authenticate basically into another instance, right? And then pull in data from that instance into your own so you can use it within your own reporting. So this just saves a big step. Now there's a bunch of other use cases. This is just one of the ones that we're commonly seeing where we have a big brand and they have an agency that's using TapClicks and they want to bring it in. But I can use a smart connector to connect data or share data between instances. This is just one case. There are many others. So let's take a look at where this is at. All right, so now we're going to go into the tool and I'm just going to walk through how to actually set one of these up. So, okay, let's say that we've logged into TapClicks. You can see that we are on the data tab on the left-hand side. We go to smart connectors. So when you have smart connectors enabled, you're going to go to smart connectors. And then I've clicked on new smart connector. So now I'm on the new smart connector form page. Here, I've just given it a name, data sharing test. I'm just using a data view name of campaigns, and that's fine. And then I go down to the delivery types. Now, remember the delivery types, there's a ton of them. You can see the list of them here. There is this option for TapAccess. So TapAccess, when you click on that, that is going to pull up another little form that you can use to authenticate into another account. So let's take a look at that. All right, so I've selected TapAccess here. Okay, on the delivery type, the drop down is now TapAccess. Now it says dashboard URL. Okay, so now what I will do is I will put in a particular instance into that dashboard URL, right? So let's see what I used here. I think I used my test account. Yeah, okay, I just used enterprise.tapclicks.com. So here's a little zoom in. I don't know if this works on anything here, but I'm just using it as an example. So I'd put in whatever that instance name is, .tapclicks.com, right? So I'm using TapAccess. I go in, I put my instance in, and I say authenticate. Now, when I click on authenticate, guess what happens? It takes me to a credential page and it says, all right, log in. So in this case, I'm going to use the account credentials to log into that instance. So this would assume then that you have account credentials for that other instance, right? So now I'm in my TapClicks and I'm saying I want to go pull data from some other instance of TapClicks. and I'm going to need to have credentials to get into that. That's what this step is asking for. And so here I'm just putting in, test@tapclicks.com, and I've given my password. Let me know in the chat if everybody's following along, so you can give me the like thumbs up, or like, this sounds good, I'm getting it, or like, hey, I'm confused, I'm not tracking. Those are all fine responses if you need to sort of do that. Okay, Sarah's all good. Thanks, Sarah. Great. All right. If anybody has any questions as we go along, feel free to use that chat. Okay, so now what I'm doing, right, is I've credentialed in, or I'm asking to credential into this other instance, right? And then it gives me this like, hey, are you sure you want to, are you authorizing to do this? So I'm gonna hit obviously accept. All right, so now what do I have? Now I have, um, I've used TapAccess, and sorry, I had to change this. So we're not using that enterprise anymore. So my bad. But so this is now the authenticated account that I'm using. We've selected TapAccess from the dropdown. I've done this. I've selected the authentication, and now what it does, it pulls up this information down here. It says, okay, so cool. You want to bring in some data. What type of data would you like to bring in? Do you want to bring in a data source, or do you want to bring in a channel, right? So just quick terminology, right? A data source would be like one of those applications that we've set up in that other account. A channel would be something where I've sort of created the data, or I've taken a couple pieces of data and munged them together in some way. So it's just asking me which type of thing I want to bring in. That's a really grainy picture, but either way, what we've done is we've taken data sources. I said, all right, well, I want to pull the Shopify data source in, and from the Shopify data source, I want to use the campaign view, right? So all it's asking for is, it just says, all right, you've authenticated in. So just tell me which data source that you'd like to pull from, and which data view you'd like to pull from. And then you just load those data fields, right? So I'm loading the data fields. I click on load data fields, and boom, another super grainy picture just for you. So now what it does is it just goes through the mapping stage. So it just says, all right, unlike an instant on connector, when you're using a smart connector requires you to actually map the fields, right? So an instant on connector, it already knows like name is name, and date is date, and location is location, and street address is street address. Well, when you're using a smart connector, you need to tell the system to make sure that all those different fields are mapped correctly. So that's what this step is. I've pulled in data from this other instance. All these different items are mapped, and I just need to go through and make sure that these are accurate. When I say, oh, discount code, I want this to show up in TapClicks as discounts, or the domain name, I want it to show up as a domain, etc. Right? So it's just a normal sort of mapping type of thing that you do anytime you're using another external data source. Right? So now we're at that step, right? And here, right, the one thing that's going to be different is this item here. Okay. Normally, when you're pulling in a data source from a smart connector, uh, it'll only pull in the different fields that are there. The difference with TapAccess is it's going to add these two fields to it. So you might look at this and go, client name, log date, I don't understand. Where'd that come from? Well, TapAccess automatically adds that, because what it does is it gives you a reference within your data to say like, hey, you're pulling it from this other instance, and here's when it was logged. So that's what that is. Those two things will be added. Don't be confused about those items. Cool. Everybody tracking so far. So the idea with TapAccess is I can go in, I can use TapAccess from the delivery type dropdown, and then I can pull data from another instance. Anybody think as they're going along of use cases that they might have for this? Feel free to drop that into the chat as we go along. That might be helpful for other people to see as well. Everybody sort of understand the concept of TapAccess. And again, there's a couple links within the release notes that you can actually go to and read more up on this particular feature, because we have written up some knowledge base articles for it. Okay, so now you see on the screen, I'm asking a question, right? So what if I'm not seeing the expected data? Okay, Brian, I have done all the steps that you provided to me, and I have gone and I have tried to authenticate into this other instance. And when I pull the data up and I get it through, I'm not seeing the expected data. Some of the stuff is missing, right? Like, what's up with that? Okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about one of the aspects that you need to think of when you're configuring your TapAccess connection, and that is to ensure that the data profile that you're using for that user account is configured appropriately. Now, you may recall that when I said I'm going to authenticate into another account, I have to give it credentials, right? Like, let's just say I'm going to use brian.childs@tapclicks.com, and I'm going to provide my password in there. All right. It assumes that the credentials that I'm using have all the data available to me, right? So if brian.childs@tapclicks.com does not have the appropriate access to the data, then I'm only going to get what Brian's data profile allows, right? So let's talk very briefly about data profiles and the importance of making sure that the authenticated account that you're using to get into that other instance actually has um, the correct information associated with it. Everybody following along with what I'm talking about? So we're going to now shift to say like, hey, when I'm credentialing into that account, am I actually using does the profile actually have the data available to it, right? If you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do a high flyover of data profiles, just for those of you who may not be familiar with this term. Does everybody understand the concept of data profile? When I say data profile, does everybody go, yep, know what that's all about? What do you guys think? No responses? No responses is maybe good. Oh, Viviana, 95. Yes, 95%. Okay, 95. We're going to get that last 5% here then, Viviana. Okay, so let's imagine if we were using Facebook, like Facebook advertising, okay? And in Facebook, you know, they have a lot of data. They have a tremendous amount of data within their connection. Now, I have a couple of users, all right? So I'm managing this account and I have many users within my company. And those different users, I may not want to have them have access to all the same data. Maybe there's data in there that I consider sensitive, whether or not it's contact details or budgets or whatever, right? So I have different users, and I want to have some of them have access to the advertising data, and some of them I want to have access to both the advertising data and maybe some of that sensitive information. But there's a particular type of user here in this hypothetical that I don't want to have access to that sensitive data. Okay. So what I could do is I could go in on a user by user basis and say, okay, user number one, you know, they get access to the advertiser data, but I want to make sure that they don't have, you know, sensitive data access. I don't want to see them stuff. User two, they can do that. User three, user five, user 20, blah, blah, blah. Right. That's a pain. So what you can do is you can create data profiles that basically have those rules associated with them. And instead of going user by user, I can just assign a user a particular data profile. So in this case, we can say that user one is actually like a contractor, and I don't want them to see all that sensitive information. I don't want them to contact anybody, blah, 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 right? I don't want them to know about my budgets. I just want them to create ads or to review ads, I should say. And then there's an account manager. And I want to have the account manager data profile to have access to all that stuff. So rather than going case by case and being like, I'm going to turn all these little switches on of what data people can see, I can just use the data profile and assign that user to a particular data profile. And that will then carry over to their user type. Okay, so why does this matter, right? Why am I talking about data profiles? Well, let's go back to the original conversation. In this case, I'm saying if you have authenticated into an account using TapAccess, that is not the right data profile, or I should say, is the unexpected data profile that you have, then you're only going to get data back or metrics back that data profile or that user can see. So you want to make sure that when you're doing this kind of authentication, that the credentials you're using are the correct type of data profile. That way you get the right information back, or either get the right data back. So I'll just walk through that really quickly in terms of how you see this. All right, so here we are. We're in our instance. I go to data profiles, right? And here I see all my different data profiles. I'm going to click on, I think we click on super admin here, right? So yeah, edit super admin. So now I'm on super admin, right? And I see all the different data applications that, that this profile has access to. I can see, and they go over to click on, in this case, Facebook ads. I'll click on detail grids. Okay. Detail grids. And then that takes me to this view. And what I can do here is I can say, these are inactive columns and active columns. So this is all the data stuff that this data profile okay, can see for Facebook ads for this data view name. And you can just scroll and scroll and scroll and find all the different data views. And so then what I can do is I can say, all right, well, they didn't get a lot of the information that they needed, or they're not getting all the different data that they're needed. So I'm going to add those inactive columns, right, over to be in the data view. So now this is the way that if I'm using TapAccess and they're not seeing the right information, the questions I have is, are they using the right data view, or is the right data view applied to those credentials? And if it is, then I need to go and update what the data view can actually see, right? If you have any questions about this, there is literally an article that describes this exact same thing. You can even see the same screenshots here. So you can even see what this is. So what metrics are available in the data view, that will walk you through a brief description of what data views are, as well as how to make sure that the right information is in there. Okay. Any questions that anybody has about our conversation here of TapAccess, data sharing? Is this helpful for you? Everybody find this to be valuable, interested in learning more about TapAccess? If you are, you can always talk to your account manager and they can walk you through this. No questions? Well, that's great. I'm amazed. People don't have any questions. That's I hats off to me. TapAccess. I think the thing that will be kind of interesting. So again, the other stuff that I wanted to point out there, right, is on the release notes. Okay, this month, this is now available to anybody who has Smart Connector. So the question for you is, do we have access to Smart Connector? Does my account have access to Smart Connector? If no, maybe talk to your account manager and see what options there are to get access to Smart Connectors. If you're not familiar with Smart Connectors generally, and you're just sort of like, we can't seem to get these things set up, or I get in there and I get a little bit confused, you can go into learn.tapclicks.com, which is our academy, and there's some coursework there about connecting data and the different options for connecting data. There's also a bunch of articles within the knowledge base itself. So if you just go into support.tapclicks.com and then just type in Smart Connector into the little search window, you will also get to a bunch of information about how to set up Smart Connectors generally, and then how to troubleshoot connections and things like that. So there's a lot of useful information in there. Now, I'm going to very, very quickly introduce, since we have just a couple minutes, I'm going to go off script. Okay. We're going off the reservation right now. I'm going to introduce this other concept of multi-level smart connector. Now, this one for non-data nerds, and I'm not going to assume anybody in here is not a data nerd, but for non-data nerds, there's a couple terminology associated with multi-level smart connector that's helpful. So I'm going to fly by the thank you page. So thank you. But then I'm going to go into this multi-level smart connector thing. Okay. So we got a couple minutes. So bear with me. Okay. So what is multi-level smart connector? All right. This is another one that you're going to see within the release notes. And I think this thing is incredibly powerful. There's a lot of different use cases for it. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you like just a brief example of what you might use this for, but you can imagine other ways of doing it. So what multi-level smart connector does is it allows you to make a relational database. So if you're not a data person, maybe relational database doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'll give you an example, and hopefully that makes sense. Let's say, okay, hypothetically, let's say that I have a spreadsheet, right? So I have like a CSV or an Excel file, and it has 2 tabs. Okay. So if you use smart connectors, you would know that when you upload a single or when you upload an Excel file, the smart connector is going to read the first tab, right? But what if I have a second tab? Well, here I'm going to use this example. Let's pretend that I have an event, okay, and I've collected on 2 different forms at this event. I collected stuff about the companies that are, visiting my booth, and then on another one, I have information about like the event itself. So when, I don't know, I'm just kind of making this up, but like, let's say that I have information about the company and the individual. And then I also have information maybe about like how we got that individual, where they came from, where they signed up from. Right. And I got those on 2 tabs within the same sheet. Well, now what do I do? I could upload both of these. I could take the second tab and turn it into its own file and then upload that as a smart connector. But wait a minute, I want to keep all this information together, right? I want to have the system treat all this information, right? And now I'm going to go over to the other tab. All right, so hopefully you're following along with this. It's like I got two tabs and I got a bunch of information associated with it. And look at this yellow highlighted thing, name1@email.com. Well, guess what? On the second tab, there's also the same information. So this would be called a relational field. So now I can say, look, treat this, let me treat this row of information as being associated with this row of information. Got it? So now what I have is I have a single piece of information that can tie these two tabs together. And what I want to do is I want the smart connector to when it brings in this data, I want it to make that relationship. I want it to say, I understand that this is the same data, and I want to bring both those tabs in at one time from maybe two different things. And you can imagine there's a ton of different use cases around this where you say, I have data in one place and I have data in another place. One application over here and I have campaign IDs, and I have another application where I'm using the same campaign IDs. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring both of those things together at the same time through a smart connector and not have to like munge things together later on the platform or do some crazy stuff with CSVs or something, right? And so what we'd call this is a relational database. And what we're doing is we're joining data. Okay, so this image represents this concept where you say, I have a user ID here, and I have a user ID over in this data table, and I have a user ID over in this tags, and I have the user ID over in this case, like maybe movies. Either way, you could say, look, I'm making a relationship, and the system understands that these are all related to one another. That is what a multi-level smart connector does. Is it says, I'm going to load in this data, I'm going to load in this data, and I'm going to tell the system which is the common field amongst them, and it's going to bring those two things together. It's going to join them together, and it's going to bring that data in. Does that make sense? Everybody follow along with what multi-level does? I'll give you the little, again, the high level flyover just for the time available that we have. So here I am again, new smart connector, right? Same page. This one is going to be a manual upload. So I'm manually uploading the data. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to upload a file, right? So I've selected the drop down on the delivery type. I upload the file. I say upload, right? That goes me to this mapping phase, right? So I do all the mappings. And then I'm going to save changes, right? So let's assume that this is like my first bit of data and I want to make an association. I'm going to save that. So once I save it, I just go through the normal process of creating a smart connector. I save. And then after I've saved it, I go back to it and I say, wait a minute, I want to connect this data to some other data. So now there's this option down here. Again, this will be available for anybody that has smart connectors. I'm going to say smart connector sublevel. So I want to make a sublevel. I want to make another level of data underneath it that it's associated with. So I click on the plus sign. That takes me to new sublevel view. So it looks exactly the same thing. Just upload another file, do the same exact thing, do the upload process. Yeah, right. And you go down over here, you're going to be mapping your files. Now the difference is that you're going to have this thing over here, parent inheritance. So this is where I'm making the associated relational fields. So I say this field right here is going to be used for this other thing over here, right? And I'm going to make the connection between it. I'm going to say, hey, you're inheriting it. You're making the association with being like, this is the email that's associated with that email from the other file. And that's how you make that connection. And then you just do the save. So that's it. So I'll go back up to my thank you page. So that multi-level smart connector is something that if you have that use case, that'd be a great one to talk to your account manager about and make sure that you know how to use it. There is a bunch of content within the knowledge base to help you along with that. So if you have more questions about it, you can go in there and check it out. I think it's a really powerful tool. I think joining data is a really powerful way because it allows you to, and you can do multiple. It doesn't just have to be two. You can keep joining and joining and joining and just putting data together, just load it all in one smart connector. So that's actually a really powerful thing. Look, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me for another What's New at TapClicks. These are always fun. I love talking to other nerds who are into reading release notes. You know, we spend a lot of time on that one, and you know, it's like, I don't know why you do it. I know why I do it, but you know, if you're into reading release notes, that's awesome. So you'll get the recording to this shortly. And thanks again. Hope to see you again.